Welcome to How to Tell Someone. I'm your host, Tonya Pieske. Before we get started, I encourage you to check the show notes. That's where you'll find content warnings. Guests on How to Tell Someone are telling vulnerable, personal stories that sometimes contain themes that may be difficult for some listeners, so please take care while listening. This story comes from...
Let me show you something real quick, though, before we get into the question. I was playing that golf game. That game is so fun. You gotta play it with me. And I was too close to the granite counter in the kitchen. And so when I swung real hard, I just, bashed it underneath the, edge of the rock counter thingy. And my hand's all swollen. It hurts so bad right now. And so, hold on. I'm gonna put my cat out real quick.
We'll be back in 2 minutes.
I love you, but you're annoying me. I must put you out. My sweet little boy. All by myself. Dear editing Tonya, I'm going to tell you what I really think about you. First of all, seriously though, you're not seeming excited about this golf game. Hopefully by the time you listen to this,
I could hear you through my headphones when I walked in the room. I was like, certainly he's not talking to his mom about VR. That is too far.
Oh no, I made her no, she thinks it's cool. I made her,
We did eventually play the VR mini golf game, and it was, admittedly, really fun. But let's get to the story. This one is from Chance.
During, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th grade, I was going to school in Southern California. And a lot of the kids that I went to school with had older siblings who were into gang affiliation and gang life. And there's just a lot of gang culture in my schools growing up. And I was the complete opposite of all that. I was a very shy, quiet, soft, artsy kid in the midst of all that. Plus, even though I'm half Hispanic, I definitely look very white, and I was, one of the few white kids in the entire school, which also kind of marginalizes you a little bit. There was a few other just kind of soft, nerdy kids that I hung out with also, and we were just into comic books and cartoons and wrestling, and we were always coming up with clubs that we would create. There was a book fair that we had once. We all bought these handbooks for young detectives, and so we each got our own handbook, and we turned this little carport garage storage area into our detective clubhouse, and so we'd have meetings in there all the time. Obviously, there was no cases to actually solve or anything, but we just liked to play detective in our clubhouse. So just very nerdy, soft, imaginative, playful kids in kind of a harsh school environment. Those kids that were getting into gang culture, they were just really wrapped up in that culture, and because me and my friends had nothing to do with that culture, we were more invisible than we were targets, right? They're just more wrapped up in that lifestyle. And me and my friends are over here, playing with toys still. So it was in the late 80s, and, at this was the height of a phenomenon called latchkey kids, where, most of my friends were living in a house with just one parent. And so by and large, kids were just coming home to empty houses. So I'm the youngest, and then the next one up is my sister Sarah, and she's 3 years older than me, and then our oldest sister is 3 years older than her. And my oldest sister kind of served as the mother for me and my other sister, and she needed to be. My mom was a single mom with 3 kids. She had to work and pay the bills, and so she really had to step in and kind of keep me and my other sister kind of in check, make sure we do our chores and stuff like that. And I would say there was more of a gap. There's obviously more of a gap between me and my oldest sister, but my middle sister kind of played a mediator between us. So like there's overlap. She kind of provided the overlap for all 3 of us and the things that we did. So luckily my sisters were very like creative, artsy type of kids, and so they were always coming up with fun games and weird clubs that we would create. And we just had a lot of like imaginative play. It was just kind of a free-for-all. And I was never like the creator of these things. They were always the creator of the things. I was just the fortunate one that got to like, I almost feel like they just kind of did it all for me, more than they did it for themselves. But cutting up pieces of paper and just creating our own board games. They would put together a carnival in the house, and where I would win tickets to win my own toys back, things like that. And I like played like, wow, I can't believe I won this, even though I already owned it. My sister Sarah, the one that is in between me and my oldest sister, she did a lot of like artsy, creative things. Like there was a show that I really loved, but because I had to leave early for school in the morning, I never got to see it. It was called Heathcliff. She would record on audio cassette the episode and then draw out pictures of the episode. And so when I got home, I would put on the audio tape, listen to the episode of Heathcliff, and thumb through these drawings that she had prepared for me so that I could catch the episode. She would also torture me. That was in between the beatings and the psychological manipulations. They would just like to run psychological experiments on me to see like what they could kind of get away with. I took a bite of a raw potato one time off the counter. I was probably like 6, and they were like, "Oh no, you didn't just eat that, did you?" And so they came up with this whole elaborate thing about how poisonous raw potato is, and that the risk is that your eyes will come out. So they took a hot cloth, like wet cloth, and they tied it around my eyes, and they were acting frantic, like desperate to like make sure they can get the medication into me on time so I can keep my sight. Meanwhile, they're like spoon feeding me big heaps of like paprika and other like seasonings from the seasoning drawer, telling me it was eye medicine to make sure that my eyes would stay intact. So fun stuff like that. And they were very protective too. They were very sweet, very protective. It was just kind of a crazy Lord of the Flies house with a lot of love, a lot of fun, and a lot of chaos. 100%, or maybe 90% of the reason I got into the arts, as I got older, was because of all that imaginative play. And it was just such that creative environment was just so like fun and energetic and comfortable that's why I just want to be in that space even as an adult, I love my mother. My mom, babies me to this very day, and that's kind of the sentiment in the whole family because I'm the only grandson. So the only boy out of a lot of girls, and the youngest, so I got kind of the royal treatment in the family. But yeah, my mom was busy, again, she just had to work a lot to pay for a house in Los Angeles and feed 3 annoying kids, so, but it was good. I mean, when she wasn't working, she was also attentive. We lived in Southern California. She would take us to Disneyland all the time, and every birthday that I had, she would take me to Knott's Berry Farm, which is another amusement park, near Disneyland. And she threw great Christmas parties, and so she had a lot of friends. She's very social, and so when adults were around, it was actually a lot of fun because there's just a lot of interesting, Southern California weirdo people, everything from like, she knew people from like executive types because she worked in Malibu for a consulting company. I still not sure exactly what she did, but so she knew types like that. But there's also like New Agers that she met down at Venice Beach who were coming and like doing crystal readings for everybody. You know what I mean? So it was just this crazy, weird, eclectic mix of adults when there were adults around. And between my two parents, I received nothing but love from my parents, but my mom was far more stable as a parent than my father was. Part of that was my mom was about 10 years older than my father, so my father was still fairly young and immature. But he wasn't neglectful. He just, he was kind of lost in life. He was just young and trying to figure out what he's trying to do, and so it was just more stable situation to be at my mom's house, and that was kind of understood. So there wasn't any fightings or battles, and I still got to see him regularly, and so my parents were good. They were good parents to me. I would say the real dysfunction when it came to my parents was really more about how they treated each other. They had divorced within a year of me being born, so I pretty much only knew them as divorced. I never really knew them as like a mom and dad stable couple ever. And when they did get together, they just, they fought like exes fight, and it would get scary sometimes when you see these adults turn on each other, because it seems so out of character, because it's so contrary to the way that they interact with me, that it's weird to see them change like that, go after each other. And this just popped in my head. It almost was like, because they could get volatile when they were together. I was almost preferred that they were not with each other. They were better apart. So my sisters, they have a different father. So my dad only had one kid, me. My dad is a lot like I am now, and that's just kind of a nomadic, doesn't really put roots down, and is just kind of always wandering and searching, and that's just kind of how I remember him. He's from Texas, so I mean, I lived with him. There were periods of times where I lived with him when he lived in Texas. There are periods of time that I lived with him when he lived in Oregon. There was a period of time that I lived with him when he lived in Southern California. So California and Oregon, I was already splitting my time there because my mom has family in California and Oregon. So that was kind of a natural thing. So again, most of my childhood was spent with my mom because of the stability, but I would always have opportunities to go spend a summer or even a full year and go to a different school for a year just to spend time with my dad. But it was just a matter of where he was located at any given time. And it was fun. So my dad had his own, he was a general contractor. Like he could do framing and painting and like labor of that kind, He was a handyman essentially. But like worked on houses and stuff like that. But he was self-employed. But I was always going to job sites with him. And so just a lot of time with the smell of paint and freshly cut wood and being given little projects to do, to feel included and to help out. And so I have like this weird sentimental feeling whenever I'm like around a construction site or I smell fresh paint. It was, really reminds me of my dad a lot. Again, he was about 10 years younger than my mom, so he was in his 20s when I was a little kid. And, thinking back when I was in my 20s, you're still kind of a kid in a lot of ways in your early 20s. And thinking back about my dad, I can really see that about him now, that he was just a kid, just doing the best he could to like feed and clothe this kid and, find his way in the world. There's the firsthand experience of my dad as a kid, but then there's the secondhand experience of reflection and stories from other people that kind of all merged together to sort of give me this impression of who this guy was, right? I really only knew him as my father because I was a little kid, and you don't really view others as like individual people with motives or thoughts or anything like that, right? They're just these entities there. When I was a little kid, I remember him as fun and easygoing and very attentive. Like, he was very attentive, making sure that I was okay, making sure that I was included, right? He wouldn't just go out and do stuff. He would make sure that wherever he was going, that he would be able to bring me with him, And then as I got older, hearing stories about him and just even reflecting on the types of, and just even reflecting as an adult of my memories of him, he was funny. He was definitely the one that sought to use humor and be the peacemaker in his family, which was a very a highly dysfunctional family. He came from a very, very dysfunctional family where him and most of his siblings were leaving by the age of 14 or 15 years old. Were already out of the house, either running away or joining the military or whatever. And that dysfunction, carried on between his siblings. Like, even now, they're very, for as much love and time as they spend, so they spend a lot of time with each other, and they love each other, and they're always in communication with each other, but they're always at each other's throats a lot of the time. They're just, there's a lot of drama, always. It's always complicated with them. Someone's always mad about something, and it's just, and you can just see that they just come from a background of trauma because they just don't know how to deal with what they're feeling and what they're thinking, and you just see that clash when they interact with each other. But my father, out of all the siblings and all the family on my father's side, my father's the only one that didn't have beef with anybody. Like, everybody loved my father. He was the mediator between everybody. He was the peacemaker, and everybody adored him, and no one had any problems with him. And I like that. Because the reason I kind of like that about my father is because that tendency was already in me before I knew that about my father, and to hear about my father and I sharing some sort of deeper personal trait was just a way that I could connect to him. So that's why I like that, he's more real, and I'm like, I did come from this guy, you know what I mean? And it all had to come just from stories from his siblings. And a lot of the times it was them pointing out my behaviors or mannerisms. They would just kind of stop in their tracks and be like, that is your father 100%. Not only do we act quite a bit alike, but we look very, very similar. They just get creeped out by it sometimes. And having a physical similarity and a personality similarity was having him present in a way within myself that I could connect to. It was like a thread. But at the same time, I felt like I was being treated as like a proxy for him. And so there was a feeling like, well, I'm in here too. I'm stoked that my father is in here, but I'm here too, and that I am my own person as well. And I didn't want to just be a fill-in in that way, Obviously, it wasn't in a way that was malicious or weird or anything. I can understand why that's meaningful for them, but I didn't want to just be that to them, I really have to emphasize that, like, my father wasn't absent. I spent time with him, quite a bit of time with him, and he was a very good and attentive dad. But a lot of who I am actually has more to do with my sister's firstly and my mom secondly, because they were far more of an influence on my life growing up. I just spent a lot more time with them. My when I think about my childhood, it's usually in the context of with my mom and my sisters more than it is with spending time with my dad. You know, I was getting close to being 8, but I was 7 at the time, and I was living in Oregon with my father, and I hadn't seen my mom for a while, or my sisters, and they were living in, and that's when they were living in Southern California, and I remember asking my dad, you know, I miss Mom, I'd like to go live with her for a little bit, because I just miss her, I haven't seen her for a while. And he was totally fine with it, you know what I mean? It's not like this, like, it wasn't like a thing. Again, there was no, like, battle for me or anything like that. They were very generous with each other when it came to me and stuff like that. So he's like, all right. So I got on a plane and I went down to Southern California, and I was living there for about a month. So it was March, and literally maybe, though it's the week of St. Patrick's Day, because I remember that because I had a bunch of shamrock glitter cutout craft shit that I was bringing home from school, right? But I come walking out of class, and again, as a latchkey kid, even in 4th grade, you know, I only lived like 4 blocks away. We would walk home by ourselves. It wasn't a big deal, you know, like, so I would always walk home every day. I'd walk to and from school. But when I got out of class, my mom and my sisters were waiting out front in their car, which, looking back on it, was very unusual. But in the moment, I'm just like, oh, there's my mom and my sisters. Great, you know, get in the car. So I wasn't thinking of it at the time, but I'm sitting in the back with one of my sisters, and then one of my sisters is up front, and then my mom's driving, obviously, and I'm just thumbing through all my shamrock glitter cards and talking about all the stuff I made in class and all that stuff, and they weren't really saying anything. And again, this is all in reflection. In the moment, totally clueless, like not picking up on anything whatsoever. So I'm just rambling on about my day. We get home, and my sister starts sitting down on the couch, and my mom comes down, and, you know, she gets eye level with me. I was kind of peeking over her shoulder, and my sisters were already really welling up, and you could just see the stress in their face. And she just says, there's been a car accident, and your father didn't survive. Your father's dead. It was the first time I've ever known anybody that had died, and it was my dad. When you're 7, you don't even have, like, the vocabulary or, like, the reference points to start, like, navigating that mentally. And so it's just, like, pure shock. I just wept, like, cried harder than I'd ever cried, and it wasn't a conscious thing. Like, the idea that he was dead wasn't even ringing in my head. It was just my body's, like, natural response to the information. So at this point, I'm weeping. My sisters are crying their eyes out. My mom's upset and crying, and that's when like a real big shift happened for me mentally. The world shifted in a real dramatic way to, like, reality. Like, that was the first taste of reality that I've ever had, and it was a doozy, you know? Like, I lost my innocence in that moment. Like, I was no longer, like, carefree. Like, from that point on, I'd never been carefree again, you know? It's just a loss of innocence. I was all that naivety of, you're always safe, you're always going to be safe, everybody around you's safe, the world is just a fun playground for you to learn things and play around in, was totally out the window. Kicked out of the garden, so to speak, and that's when my thoughts start getting fuzzy. Like, I have a lot of clarity. I have memories from being 2-3 years old, like as a toddler. like pretty coherent, long memories, all the way up to 7 years old. Really clear, crisp memory. From 7 to about 11, really fuzzy. It maybe is a self-defense mechanism, but or something, I don't know, but or just the natural consequences of lots of stress on your brain, where your brain just, you know, kind of fizzles out a little bit in those moments. But so from that point on, of getting the news up into the funeral and to the point where we moved to another part of California, is just more like dotted memories of like key events that took place. Like, I actually can't even remember a thing between, because my father we were living in Southern California, but he was buried in Texas because that's where his mom's buried, who I never actually met. She died before I was even born. He was being buried in Texas, and so I have really no memory except for just all of a sudden being in Texas at the funeral and just getting, you know, having my tie done up and my little suit put on. My dad's side of the family is very military heavy, and so he had a military funeral. It's so weird because it meant a lot to like my family, but as a little kid, you're already like on edge, and they're like shooting guns off in the air. So it was actually really stressful. I really didn't like that part of it. The guns were really freaking me out. But you know, but then they do they shoot the guns, and then they fold the flag, and then they gave me the flag, and again, all this ceremony, I have no idea what this is about. I thought it wasn't until much later. I thought that's how all funerals happened. I thought that was just what a funeral was. I didn't realize it was like military specific. I just thought that's what happened when you had a funeral. It was hard to see all the adults of my life so broken down. You know, like I said, my father was the mediator. He was the peacemaker. He was the only one that everybody got along with. And so to see how distraught all these adults were was really scary for me. To just see them breaking down and weeping uncontrollably. My grandfather especially. Oh, the poor guy was already a mess. He was in the Korean War and the Vietnam War. And, you know, he'd seen a lot of horrible shit. He was a raging alcoholic. You know, just a lot of trauma. You know, it's just, trauma's generational, and he just brought all that with him, plus all the war that he had to go. I mean, he used to just drink in front of the television and just be screaming into the air about how many people he had to kill in these wars, and as he's just belligerent and drunk, and it's scary, right? So the guy was already kind of a loose cannon, and this really just was like too much for him to bear. And he, you know, it was one of those trying to climb into the coffin kind of falling apart, you know what I mean? And then there's this one thing that happened that really freaked me out and made me feel horrible at the same time. The funeral. It was open casket. And it was so weird how much it didn't look like him. It really was just like this empty vessel. Whatever it is my dad was gone. And it was clear to the point that it didn't even look like him in that coffin. And he just looked so like mannequin-like. It was just really macabre and weird, right? And but you know, my grandfather's like kissing on him and stuff like that. He's just an emotional wreck. He's not thinking properly. He picks me up and sticks me head first to try to give my father a kiss. But he quickly realized I was not up for this, so he wasn't like, you know, he didn't grab me by the ankles and like was like trying to shove me in. It was pretty quick. He was quick to notice that I was upset by that, and he put me down. But it was long enough for me to be freaked out. It was so horrifying in that moment. And then I was really felt guilty about it, that I didn't want to touch my father. But it didn't look like him. That's what freaked me out. It didn't look like him. And then I just was like racked with the guilt, like for not, showing love or affection to my dad in that final moment, So it's just this like cascade of like all these crazy intense emotions of loss and grief and terror and despair and guilt and panic and anxiety, and every adult that's supposed to be a stable figure around me is also in the same state. So there's, we're all just in this ocean getting tossed around. My memories definitely start coming back into play kind of as the chaos of the situation started to die down, as I was starting to get back to going to school, and life was having to continue, right? Obviously, most of my dad's family lived in Texas, so I didn't really have to interact with them after the funeral in any way. So it was really just my mom and my sisters primarily, and then my dad's two sisters did live in Southern California, but I wasn't seeing them every day like I would see my mom and my sisters, right? So my sisters were still in school. I was in school. We had to go to school, and my mom, had to pay for where we live, so she has to go back to work, and so it's just a matter of just getting back to it. But it was obviously it was very different when I returned, because everybody's notified, everybody at the school was notified, and all my teachers were notified. Obviously, I had been gone for like 2 weeks, probably, maybe even longer. I don't know. I literally cannot remember time at that point. But I remember returning, and it was completely, there was no ill intention. It was completely genuine empathy and compassion for a kid that just lost a parent. But it's that double-edged sword of the last thing you want to be as a kid in school is different than all the other kids. And all of a sudden I had this huge thing that made me very, very different, and everybody was treating me very, very differently when I returned back to school. And it was uncomfortable for me. I didn't like the attention. I didn't like the look of sorrow in their eyes when they were like looking at me as I'm just trying to turn in my homework, you know what I mean? And it wasn't pity, but at times it felt like pity, and I didn't want to be pitied. Even as an 8-year-old, I knew I didn't like that feeling of being felt sorry for, So all those other emotions, now I'm embarrassed on top of it all. You know what I mean? So now we have embarrassment on top of the grief and the guilt and the anxiety and all that shit. But so I had my very first panic attack pretty much within the first year of my dad dying. And I remember I was sitting on the couch watching Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and it was someone died on screen, and all of a sudden I just had this like voice in my head like, I'm gonna die, and there's nothing I could do about it. And I immediately had a panic attack, and I didn't know what a panic attack was, so I just was like vibrating and terrified and had zero clue what was happening. And then like when I kind of came down, I was still like shaky, and like it was just a really weird experience. And I remember, and my sisters feel bad now because I talked to them about it as an adult, but at the time they made fun of me because I walked up to them, not like within a day of that happening, I walked up to them and I just was like, I'm like 9 years old, and I'm like, you guys ever just feel really tense? Because that's the only way I could describe what happened to me, right? I was like, I don't know what that was. I just felt really, really tense, and I don't know. Yeah, they're like, they just like looked at each other and just started laughing because there's such a funny. It's the delivery, and that kind of question from a 9-year-old kid is just kind of a funny question. So I get why they laughed about it. But I was really just trying to figure out what the fuck what I just experienced, and they felt bad years later. I was like, remember that time I like was feeling really tense? That was actually my very first horrendous panic attack. That was what was happening. And you were laughing, but I mean that's the least of the ways they've tortured me in growing up, so that's fine. But There was another thing, and this is the part that I was kind of backtracking, was that it wasn't long after I started kind of going back to school and things started settling. That's when my brain kicked in. That's when my, like, thinking really started. It, like, kick-started my ability to think in a way of, like, really, like, deep reflection. Contemplating the future. What does it mean? You know what I mean? I'm 8 years old and I'm like trying to like grapple with these existential problems, you know, with like the 2 words I have to describe it all, you know. But one of the things I immediately started reflecting on was like, how could have this been avoided? Partly because I was like, how can I avoid death? Like I immediately became afraid of everything. I was like, holy shit, like the moment I step out this door, like someone's gonna get me, you know. But then I also started to think like, what could have been done differently? And this is really when the guilt came on. I thought to myself, because this was only a month after I asked my father to move back to my mom's, maybe a little bit less, within a month or so. I don't know exactly, but it was not long after I had returned to live with my mom. And he specifically came down to Southern California to come see me to take me fishing because he was missing me. And it was that weekend that he came down to see me that he got in a car wreck in Southern California. So now I'm thinking, why did I come to Southern California? Well, I should have just stayed in Oregon. If I would have stayed in Oregon, none of this would have happened. So now, on top of it all, it's my fault. I mean, I don't think I've cried about my father in, I don't know, decades, you know? And that was weird. I was getting choked up, and I was surprised by that because you feel like, oh, it's been so long, you know? I've ran these scenarios over in my head a million times. There's no rock to flip over anymore, you know? But it's weird. I think it goes to show like how these things stick, you know? And I don't even know if you could ever shake them, you know? I think they just become these things you gotta, like, have and navigate for, like, the rest of your life. It's such a hard thing to explain, like, when you're unconscious and in a flash you're conscious, like in a deep way that you just didn't know existed 2 fucking seconds ago. You know, that kind of shock just, like, thrust me to that headspace, you know, and my behaviors immediately shifted, and in ways that I wasn't really in control of. I was ditching school because I couldn't handle the world. Like the world was freaking me out, and like school seemed stupid and pointless, and I just wanted to be left alone, and I didn't want to like deal with anything, and I was having trouble relating to people all of a sudden, and like so it was just like being around others was just becoming increasingly uncomfortable, and I didn't want to. Nothing felt like worth investing in at that point, and there was that sense of getting back to business. I'm going to school, and I'm doing terrible in school, and you know. One of my teachers in front of the entire class says, you got an F on your test. You can't use the death of your dad as an excuse not to do well on your schoolwork. And so already I'm embarrassed by I don't want, like, when people would ask me where my father was, for people who didn't know, I would say he's in Texas. I would never say that he was dead. I would just say he's in Texas, which, yeah, I mean, he was in Texas. He was buried in Texas. So it was something that I still was embarrassed about because I didn't want to stand out for that reason especially. And I think that in particular, that particular moment filled me with a lot of resentment and disdain. It was bigger than education. It's bigger than teachers. It was like a disdain for like the systems of the world and their demands. It just felt like there's this soulless machine that's just like, it doesn't give a fuck. you know? And when she says that in front of the entire class, and then I'm holding back my tears, I'm like white knuckling, like I do not want to cry I'm already embarrassed. The last thing I need to do right now is fucking cry in front of everybody. But man, I wasn't like sobbing, but it was one of those cries where you're like just, you know, and like it's kind of, you know, oozing out of you a little bit, and you're just kind of like, you know, shaking, holding it in, you know. And I just went and sat back down and carried on with my fucking day, you know. You know, there's no telling what people were thinking or what people's motivations were. I would say that my mom and my sisters actually were the ones that handled it the best in terms of like how they dealt with me. They didn't punish me for my behavior. They may not, or like my mom may not have understood or had the tools or the knowledge to like know how to step in or what processes needed to unfold to like sort of like rectify the situation. But I can give a general sense or a general answer of like what the climate of mental health at the time was. You know, I mean, we're talking the 80s still, you know, I mean, this is in the 80s. And the idea of just being stoic and carrying on, moving forward, you know, like, you know, my grandparents and like the adults in my life, they'd seen things like the Great Depression, they'd seen like 2 world wars, you know, they'd seen some shit, and they just had to like, you know, bear it, suffer, and then like exist. I don't think there was quite the understanding in the general zeitgeist about really what happens to the inner world when these types of things happen to us. So I don't think people were just like giving me space, because a lot of the times I was getting in trouble for it and getting reprimanded, and you know, so I was getting truancy and like threats that they're going to call the police because I'm ditching school all the time, and like I'm not doing my homework, so I'm getting detention and getting suspended, and you know, and I wasn't like doing terrible things or anything. I wasn't like destroying property or getting into fights or anything. It was just a complete withdrawal and not participating in anything, and that wasn't allowed. That was against the rules. You had to be participating in shit. So it definitely carried on for the rest of my school years, you know. And what's weird is I didn't even associate that behavior at the time with the death of my father. It was like years later, I'm like, oh, that's why I was acting like that. I was fucking traumatized. Duh. No wonder, you know, I just thought I got bored of school, or I just, you know, like, or I knew whatever was happening over there, I had lost interest in and just had wanted nothing to do with it. You know, so I go from being in the gifted and talented program, scoring high on tests and stuff, to I dropped out of high school with a barely 9th grade education. You know, I was technically in 11th grade, but in terms of credits, because I was never doing my homework, I was always ditching school to smoke weed or go skateboard. You know, by this time, you know, I've never really talked about this, I don't think, in this kind of depth before. You know, and even now, like, I'm having revelations about the whole thing. You know, and I'm full of all kinds of anxieties and pathologies and neurotic tendencies. You know, part of it's just, you know, maybe my own temperament, and part of it's being a creative, but I mean, there's definitely a big chunk of it that's just like a dose of reality that just left a scar, and I'm just like, it's not even a scar, it's just like a wound that's just kind of a dull ache that's just existed year after year after year. But yeah, it absolutely just totally decimated all normal roads to adulthood. And you know me, I live anything but a normal adult life. Still, you know, for better or worse, you know. You know, I didn't get my driver's license until I was 28 years old, because I was terrified of driving, because that's how my dad died. You know what I mean? Like, these weren't vehicles. These were fucking death machines. And fuck if I was going to get in one. It wasn't until decades later that I went back to college and, really enjoyed school and did really, really well, and it was kind of a reclaiming that kid that liked learning before all that happened, To this day, I'm a very, kind of outside the margins of life kind of person, and I feel comfortable there, and I think it's just because that's just where I've been living for fucking 30 plus years, out of safety reasons, out of safety concerns mainly. But I've also learned to thrive in that kind of environment as well. There's a positive side to kind of being like that as well, I think. Yeah, so, I'm in my mid-20s. I'm as fit as can be. I'm a skateboarder. I'll skate for 10 to 12 hours. Peak health. I was just as healthy as you could possibly be. But real rapidly, I had this year where I was throwing up a lot. Especially after I was eating food. And it was so random because I would just eat, puke, and then feel fine. And so I didn't know what it was. And then I started feeling weaker, and I just could feel something was really wrong. And I went to the doctor, and I asked the doctor, I have diabetes, runs in my family. Is there, can I get tested for that? Can that be looked into? And he doesn't even look up from his clipboard. He goes, "Oh, you're too young for that." And he just turns around and walks out. About 9 months later, I've, at this point, dropped about 35, 40 pounds within months. Everything I was every time I drank water, it tasted like sugar water, and I was having trouble holding down food, and it happened so fast. That's what's so weird about it. That's why it took a minute to catch on with what was going on. But luckily, and this literally saved my life, my aunt, who's a type 1 diabetic, was visiting from Texas. I hadn't seen her for a while either. So she took one look at me and was like, "I need to test your blood sugar." And so, because she had her test kit with her, and she tested my blood sugar, and it was in the 500s. Your sugar should be about 90 if you haven't eaten, maybe 110 after you've had a big meal. That's where your sugar should be. So my sugars are through the roof. I'm instantly rushed to the hospital. They instantly get me in the car, rush me to the hospital, and it turned out I was right at the height of what's called ketoacidosis. And that's when, because your body's not breaking down all that sugar, because my pancreas isn't working, that's its job, is to break that sugar down and turn it into fuel. It wasn't doing that, and so it was just stockpiling in my body, and it begins to turn poisonous in your body. And so ketoacidosis is kind of the state you go into shortly before you have strokes and heart attacks or go into comas. The really horrible shit, right? So I was immediately put in the hospital, and they just hooked me up to all these IVs, and they have to bring your sugars down slowly. So I was just in the hospital for days, just getting pumped full of fluids, surrounded by family. Everybody's there, I'm being lighthearted. Everybody's upset, but I'm trying to keep everybody's spirits up because I don't want to be the source of all this grief, But it was so crazy because one of the consequences of when your blood sugars are shifting around is it affects your eyesight. And so when they brought my sugars out of the rafters and they brought it back to normal levels, I went blind for a week because my eyes had to readjust to my glucose levels. So they'd been in the 500s for so long. And it wasn't blackout blind. It was blurry light blind. I could see light, but it was just glare. Everything just looked like white out glare. It was really scary. But I mean, they assured me my sight would come back. So I knew it wasn't a permanent condition, but it was scary and frustrating to try to I'm already feeling like shit. I can't see anything. And they gave me the wrong medication. So they gave me medication that's for type 2 diabetes. So when I leave the hospital, they give me a bunch of medication that's for type 2 diabetics, something called metformin. Made me sick as... it made me feel sicker than before I went into the hospital. And I was just... And then I'm like calling them up. I'm like, listen, I think I'm dying. What is going on? And they're like, oh, sorry, we gave it the wrong meds. So at that point, they got me on the right meds. And then, so now my life has just been a series of needles. And so at this point, now as a type 1 diabetic, I take a needle to the body, probably including finger pricks, which I don't do anymore because I have a different system for that. But in those earlier days, I was probably taking a needle to the body 15 to 20 times a day. Just to eat. Just to have some food, right? Just to have an apple. I had to and that was a weird thing, right? I'd never had a fear of needles, but you have to then acclimate to this idea that I have to give myself a shot. I have to shove a needle in my body all the time. And I don't think about it now, it's not a problem, but initially that's really weird. Injecting yourself with stuff, you're like, wow, this is just uncomfortable and scary. But it's weird because diabetes is one of those things that radically changes as you change and as you age and stuff like that. The disease itself is like a moving target. It doesn't manifest the same throughout the years, So between the ages of 19 and 27, I'd actually spent a good chunk of time feeling pretty secure and confident because I'm young, I'm fit, I'm in my 20s. Your brain tells you can do anything and you believe it. And so I actually had quite a few years where I really didn't experience any major problems from the diabetes once I got my medications and I figured out the system and I figured it out. So it just became this thing that, I had to live with now. People have to live with shit like that, and I didn't really think about it that much. But then you get into your mid 30s, and then you get into your mid 40s. It's a autoimmune disease, so you're not dying from diabetes. You're dying from all the things diabetes makes you susceptible to. And one of the weird things that started to emerge was I started getting all these allergies. I got a peanut allergy at 35 out of nowhere, and hazelnut allergy out of nowhere. And so food's already a danger zone for me. Can't eat a grapefruit because of the statins that I'm on. I have to take statins for cholesterol, and you eat a grapefruit, your head explodes. I don't know what happens exactly. Heart attack. Something bad happens. They're very clear. Do not even look at a grapefruit if you're on this shit. So yeah, it's just weird that this weird, complicated relationship I have with food now. But as I got older, and as I've gotten older, in addition to the just normal wear and tear and physical pain that comes with aging, I'm having to experience things as a consequence of the diabetes as well. Lots of nerve damage, just random pains in my guts for no particular reason. Oh, today I'm just going to feel nauseous all day, I guess. Or, headaches for 2 days in a row. Or, just all these weird, you're not well symptoms, but well enough to function as a human being. So it's kind of, I'd say in the last 10 years especially, it's been kind of a greater source of suffering than it had been in the past. And so I've had to really come to terms with that's just the reality of being a diabetic at my age. And I would say that there's time, so I've been in the hospital a couple of times where my sugars got out of whack, or when I found out I had that peanut allergy. I was in the hospital really, 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 really sick. I could have died if not treated properly, but I'm in the hospital, they're taking care of you. It's easy to roll that back if you get proper treatment. So I didn't feel like I was in danger of dying, but it definitely is at the same time puts a big spotlight on mortality in general. And my views of it are kind of complicated. Sometimes I just get frustrated Because sometimes I'm real motivated to do something, or I really want to engage with something, and I just don't have the stamina. I'm tired, or brain fog is a real big problem for me sometimes, and you just can't think clearly. And as someone who likes to think and read, and if you can't focus and think or concentrate, that's, it's frustrating. But I would say that it's actually made me have a different feeling about not only death, but suffering in general. And suffering is woven into our existence, and it has no shortage of manifestations, and that's a weird thing. And I've seen where that I can understand why people can really spiral and be terrorized by that suffering, and really not want to do the work to integrate it or accept it. But I kind of feel like it's actually made me. There's an odd, there's an opportunity to transmute pain and suffering into something good. That is possible, It's just it's just hard, but it's at least something that I think has made me a better person, a softer person, and more empathetic. And I don't want to be defeated, And so if I can find methods to transmute that into something good in some way, for me it's art. And I do love creativity, and I give my sisters a lot of credit for that because of how creative and artistic they were. But also, my grandfather, he was an artist, and he drew a lot of war scenes, and he was a skydiver for the Golden Knights, which is an army skydiving group. And so he did a lot of pictures of skydivers and stuff like that. And my dad was a skydiver. He had 1,100 jumps by the age of 16 or something like that. I have a news article, and that's all they did. They lived out in Texas, and they just would get in a plane, jump out of it, land, get back in, jump out of it. So they were really into that. But anyways, my grandfather drew. My father also was a doodler. He was always doodling and drawing and stuff. And I remember one time he bought me a sketch pad. I was 6. And I was on a job site with him, and so he's just doing whatever construction stuff. And it's in Southern California, so we're just on this hill. And so there's this really nice vista, right? This really nice scene. And I drew it it was a kid's rendering, but I was incorporating details, and I got a pretty good gist of the composition of the hillsides and stuff like that. And I remember my dad coming over and really being impressed by this drawing, and really proud that I did this drawing. And that was a really, obviously we always just want to impress and please our parents, so that really put something in me about whoa, maybe this is something that is special about me in some way, maybe this is something that I can be about. And because he did construction, and he was he had paint and all that kind of stuff, he would let me draw all over my bedroom walls whenever I wanted, and whenever I filled up the wall, he would paint over it and just let me draw all over it again. So he just gave me a lot of encouragement and freedom to be creative and artistic, even as a little kid. I give my sisters a lot of credit for that creativity, that artistic streak, but really my dad had a really big part of that too. I just like to acknowledge that, because there's so little that he was able to give me in such a short amount of time. My dad was only 29 when he died, and I'm 45, and when I look at someone in their 20s right now, and they look like kids in their faces still, you know what I mean? And even in their behavior, they're still very kid-like, from this perspective. And that's just such a weird thing to think. If I saw my dad as he was today, he would just look like some punk kid to me. It's just weird to think that I'm this really grown adult man But my father is just forever like this kid. Because there was not any real proper mental care that was implemented at that crucial time, I learned to disassociate. That was my method to like feel like I was on some sort of path to healing, you know? And when you get entrenched in that kind of thing, it's really hard, especially for like decades before you realize what you've done, right? You're like, Jesus, with that, I've built this structure within myself, and I'm just not sure it could be, deconstructed at this point. So, I've openly talked about my father passing away in a car accident over the years. But when you do that, it's really more of an abstraction and like kind of a small collection of discrete facts versus telling the story in depth and really like thinking about the details really like makes you mentally time travel back to the event in a way that you don't do in a more superficial retelling. And so I haven't relived it in that way in a really long time. Really putting myself in the shoes of 7-year-old me, you know? But it was also it's kind of nice because I almost kind of felt bad over time, like the fact that I didn't feel upset as much anymore. Like I felt like I kind of want to be sad about that still, you know? I think that's okay. Like I said, I haven't cried about my father 20 plus years, you know what I mean? Maybe even longer than that. And even though I didn't like weep, I was getting choked up, and I was surprised by that. You know, I'm almost like choked up for that kid as well. And I was moved and glad and relieved that my heart still hurts for my dad.
The way Chance described the experience of telling his story for the podcast mirrors a lot of what I heard from guests throughout the process. This massive thing that has shaped how we perceive and move through the world becomes so intrinsic to who we are that, ironically, we can lose touch with the scale and weight of it. I really like the way Chance described it as feeling like a small collection of discrete facts. Something very different happens when you have the right conditions to tell the story slowly and in full. There's no pressure to make it palatable or entertaining or relatable. The only goal is to communicate the emotional truth of what happened. And in that environment, you may be surprised, like Chance was, by the feelings that sit just under the surface. When Chance and I met over 15 years ago, I liked him immediately. Although we met as adults, our friendship has always felt to me like a childhood friendship. Very early on, we had a long conversation about what we were like as kids. We definitely would have been friends if we had known each other then. The similarities in our personalities and interests were uncanny, right down to the Detective Club and an obsession with the story All Summer in a Day by Ray Bradbury. I still remember the first time we had a real conversation. He told me about a time capsule he buried as a kid, and I could see the whole thing perfectly in my mind, almost like I was there, standing next to him holding a shovel. When we recorded his story and Chance verbalized the internal thought he had at 7 years old that he felt his father's death was a result of his choice to visit his mom and sisters, my heart instantly broke and my eyes welled up with tears. That was the moment that Chance got choked up as well. There's something that happens when you see someone you trust with your vulnerability respond to your story in real time. It's a way to hold up a mirror to those feelings sitting just under the surface and give yourself permission to reintegrate them safely. Chance's story marks the last of this collection of episodes. I'll be taking a break before releasing the next collection later this year. In the meantime, I will still be writing on Substack, so don't forget to follow me there. How to Tell Someone is hosted and produced by me, Tonya Pieske. The theme song is called The Star, which is a track from my album Erotic Thriller.
You're my gateway to good taste in music. There's no artist I respect more, you know?
You can find The Star and the rest of my music everywhere you stream under the name Hexteria, Hexteria, or at hexteriamusic.com. You'll find that info in the show notes of every episode. This podcast is a one-person operation, and my overhead is pretty low, to be honest with you, but it does cost money to produce a podcast. If you find value in this kind of anti-algorithmic, pro-empathetic storytelling, you can help offset the cost of website and platform fees, extra equipment to accommodate guests, and other boring expenses by picking up some merch at howtotellsomeone.com. You'll find some shirts and guided journals with prompts to help you tell your own stories. We'll see you again soon.
Tej, I mean, you know I love you.
Love you too.